Try not to embarrass me, they're way above your level, my fiancé whispered. Then the host ignored him, rushed to me, and said, "We've all been waiting to meet you." He went pale, started stammering, and I just smiled like, "Oh, you mean my friends." He leaned in as we stepped out of the rideshare in front of that glass-walled mansion in West Lake Hills, his breath sharp with the bourbon he'd pre-gamed with to steady his nerves. "Try not to embarrass me. These people are way above your level." The words slid out of him like he'd rehearsed them, quiet enough that no one else could hear, sharp enough to split something in me clean down the middle. I didn't give him anything back. Not a flinch, not a breath, not a syllable. I just walked beside him up the stone steps, the evening heat clinging to my neck. The house glowed from the inside, soft yellow lighting, silhouettes of expensive art on the walls, the hum of people who believed their money made them interesting. I'd been dreading this night for weeks, but not like this. Not with him turning it into a performance where I was somehow the liability. He pressed his hand to the small of my back as we crossed the threshold, but it wasn't affectionate. It was directional, like he was pushing a shopping cart he didn't want drifting off. Inside, the first thing I noticed was how quiet everything went around us. Not silent, just that small shift when conversations tilt, eyes flick, people register new arrivals. He straightened, plastered on that fake social grin he used at networking events, and whispered, "Let me do the talking." But before he could even take a full step forward, the host, a man in a navy blazer and the kind of confidence that comes from generational wealth, broke away from a circle of guests and hurried straight toward me. "Not him, me." "Finally," the host said, reaching out and shaking my hand with both of his like he'd been waiting outside an airport terminal for me to land. "We've all been waiting to meet you." I felt my boyfriend's body tense beside me, like every muscle locked at once. When I turned, his face had drained so fast it looked almost translucent under the recessed lighting. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. Not even a breath. The host didn't even look at him. He was still gripping my hand, guiding me forward, calling over people by name. "She's here, this is her." A few heads turned with recognition. One woman actually clapped. My boyfriend finally managed a strained laugh, thin, brittle. I didn't realize." The host cut him off without acknowledging he spoke at all. "You didn't tell us she was this impressive," he said, still smiling at me. "We thought you were exaggerating." My boyfriend's jaw twitched. I could feel the panic radiating off him, thick enough to choke on. I didn't understand what was happening yet, but he did. And whatever he'd assumed about how tonight would go, this wasn't it. People were moving in, eager, curious, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I just held the host's gaze and let the moment breathe. Let him squirm in it. He grabbed my arm, not gently, and whispered again, but this time the words were rushed, shaky, almost frantic. "What did you tell them? What the hell did you say about yourself?" I turned slowly toward him, watching fear crawl across his features. Because now I wasn't the one out of place. He was, and he knew it. Before I could answer, before I could even decide what expression to put on my face, someone behind us said loudly, almost ceremonially, "Bring her in. She should see it first." The room parted. Every set of eyes shifted to me, and my boyfriend looked like he was watching his entire world tilt off its axis. People assume the worst betrayals are loud. Sudden, obvious. But with him, Evan, it was always the small cuts. The quiet ones. The ones he could deny later because there was no single moment dramatic enough to point at and say, "There." That's when he stopped seeing me as a person. We'd met 3 years earlier in Austin, both of us in our late 20s, both working long hours in our own corners of the city. I was a junior data analyst in a biotech firm off Mopac, trying to earn my way into a research team. He was an account manager at a mid-tier marketing agency downtown, always stressed, always talking about clients who don't understand his genius. I used to think that was self-deprecating humor. It wasn't. He really meant it. At first, his confidence felt grounding. He would tell me he admired my focus, my drive, how hard I worked. But slowly, those compliments twisted. He began calling my job behind-the-scenes stuff. He'd introduce me at parties as the numbers girl. He'd tell strangers in front of me that I was brilliant at technical tasks, the way someone might talk about a dog that learned a trick. And every time I pushed back, every time I tried to tell him I wasn't someone he could talk down to, he'd flip it. "Why are you so sensitive? Why are you making everything a fight?" Two moments shaped the fire that had been smoldering in me long before we stepped into that mansion. The first was the night he forgot to pick me up from the airport after I'd come back from presenting a small internal report in Chicago. It wasn't a big conference, nothing prestigious, but it mattered to me. I'd spent weeks preparing. My manager had praised me in front of the team. I called him from the terminal, expecting he'd at least pretend to care. Instead, he didn't answer. Then texted me an hour later, got drinks with the guys. You can Uber, right? Don't make it a thing. He didn't ask how it went. Not that night. Not ever. The second moment was uglier. Last fall, I'd been invited, quietly, tentatively, to collaborate on a pilot project with a well-known AI ethics researcher from UT Austin. It was early stage, nothing guaranteed, but it was the first time in my life I felt like someone truly saw potential in me. When I told Evan, he laughed, not out of humor, out of disbelief. Babe, they probably needed someone to do their spreadsheets. Don't build it up in your head. I remember standing in our kitchen, the dishwasher humming, the smell of leftover pad thai in the air, and feeling a coldness rise inside me I didn't recognize. Something shut off. Something else lit up. After that, he started framing me as overly ambitious. He'd tell people I was always chasing something unrealistic. And every time he said it, I felt myself shrinking to fit the version of me he needed. The one who always stayed slightly beneath him so he could feel tall. But the truth, the part he never bothered to learn, is that the pilot project became something larger. Much larger. It had grown quietly for months, entirely under NDA, entirely outside of anything he cared enough to notice. He never asked about my work, so I never had to lie. He just assumed nothing about me could matter in any room he valued. Which is how we reached that mansion in Westlake Hills, him smug, me silent, and a truth waiting inside that he had no idea existed. And walking in, hearing the host rush toward me, seeing recognition in strangers' eyes, I felt every small cut from the past 3 years gather into one sharp point. He had spent years making sure I stayed small. Now he was realizing, too late, that I hadn't stayed there. When the room split open for me that night, it wasn't luck. It wasn't coincidence. It was the slow, grinding climb I'd been making alone for over a year, one he'd never bothered to look at closely enough to fear. Not once. The pilot project with the UT researcher, Dr. Miriam Kaplan, had grown teeth. What started as a small ethics audit for a local startup evolved into a multi-institution partnership on a new transparency framework for medical AI systems, the kind that could change funding pipelines. The kind that pulled eyes from investors and academics who didn't care about polished small talk or curated networking personas, the exact world Evan obsessed over. And somehow, the more I grew inside that work, the quieter I became at home, not out of secrecy but self-preservation. I stopped offering details, stopped trying to share my day. I learned that anything I was proud of would be met with dismissal, jealousy, or one of those tight-lipped smiles that said he was rewriting my accomplishment in his head so he could feel comfortable again. I started staying late at the lab, in that converted wing on the UT campus filled with whiteboards, cold brew kegs, and researchers who saw me as an equal. The first time Dr. Kaplan introduced me as a co-author, I genuinely thought she'd misspoken. But she hadn't, and when she looked at me afterward and said, "I need someone who sees details the way you do," I felt something uncoil inside my chest that had been knotted for years. Growth, I learned, doesn't feel triumphant at first. It feels lonely. It pulls you away from people who benefit from the smaller version of you. At home, Evan noticed the shift, but not in a way that registered emotionally. He just complained. "You're never around anymore. You're acting different. You're obsessed with that job." Meanwhile, he was going out more, late nights with clients. Sudden weekend plans he barely explained. I wasn't stupid. I saw the patterns, but I didn't have the energy to confront him. I poured everything into the project, into proving to myself that I could build something bigger than the boundaries he'd set for me. Months passed like that, me expanding, him retreating into defensiveness and petty criticisms. He started picking at my clothes, my voice, my posture at restaurants. Little comments meant to pull me back to a size he could control. But I kept growing anyway. The tipping point came in early spring. Our team's work attracted the attention of a private healthcare consortium, the kind that funds national initiatives, The kind whose board members live in places like that West Lake Hills mansion. They invited our core contributors to a series of closed-door meetings. All NDA, all deeply strategic. I wasn't just invited. I was listed as lead data architect. When I told Dr. Kaplan I wasn't sure I was ready for that title, she looked at me like I'd insulted her. "You've been leading half this work for months. You're the only one who doesn't seem to know it." That night, I sat alone in my car in the UT parking garage long after the lights had shut off. It wasn't pride I felt, it was grief. Grief for how small I had let myself become. Grief for every time I'd swallowed myself to keep the peace with a man who never once wondered if I was shrinking or suffocating. The meetings intensified. I was presenting weekly. I was making decisions that would ripple outward into national policy proposals. I was in rooms I never imagined I'd get near. And still, Evan never noticed. He just kept asking whether I'd ironed his shirts. By the time we drove out to that mansion for what he called a critical networking opportunity for him, I had already made a quiet decision. I wasn't staying small for him anymore. The night was going to show him that, and I didn't even have to lift a finger. The moment the host guided me deeper into the house, something in the air shifted, not just curiosity, not just recognition. It was expectation. People weren't just glad I was there. They'd been planning for me to be there. Evan kept pace half a step behind me, stiff, silent, breathing too fast. Every time someone glanced at him, he straightened like he thought he could salvage his role in this night by sheer posture. But no one was looking at him for long. He was background, an accessory. And for the first time since I'd known him, he understood it. We moved into a long, open living room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Austin. Conversations quieted. A woman in a charcoal dress touched the host's elbow. He nodded, then he turned to me. "Before dinner, we wanted to show you something," he said. "Your work has already changed the trajectory of this partnership. You deserve to see how far it's reached." Evan blinked hard, like he'd misheard. Her what?" he stammered. "Changed what?" The host didn't even slow down. He led me toward a set of double doors. When they opened, the room inside was colder, dimmer, lined with monitors and architectural models. It wasn't a party space. It was a war room. And the second I stepped inside, every person turned toward me with the kind of respect I'd only seen directed at people who carry entire projects on their backs. "Thank you for coming," someone said. A man with silver hair, the kind of elder statesman presence that makes you instinctively straighten your spine. "We've been discussing implementation timelines, but we agreed we can't finalize anything without your input." Evan made a choking sound, soft but unmistakable. I didn't look at him. I looked at the nearest screen. It displayed the title of our framework, the one I'd built from scratch over long nights, the one I'd agonized over, rewritten, defended, reshaped. Kaplan-Ray's Protocol for Medical AI Transparency. My name, spelled correctly, front and center. For one horrible, suspended second, I thought it might be a mistake, that maybe I'd walked into someone else's life by accident. But then Dr. Kaplan herself stepped forward from the far end of the room, smiling like she'd been waiting specifically for this moment. "You made it," she said, and pulled me into a quick, fierce hug. "Good. We held everything until you arrived." Evan swayed like someone had pushed him. "You wait, Rays," he whispered at me, voice thin. They're using your name. You didn't tell me that. Why didn't you tell me that?" There it was. The thing that stung him most. Not the secrecy, not the surprise. The fact that my name, the one he'd spent years subtly diminishing, carried weight here. More than his. More than anyone he'd hoped to impress tonight. I didn't answer him. I couldn't, not with the room full of people waiting for me to anchor their next move. Dr. Kaplan gestured toward the primary display. "This is the new version of the decision tree auditing model you proposed last month. The consortium board loved it. They want you to walk them through your rationale." Evan's breath hitched. You're presenting, tonight, to these people." Again, no one looked at him. The host motioned me forward. "Whenever you're ready." I stepped toward the screen, feeling the weight of every small dismissal, every belittling comment, every effort he'd made to keep me in a version of myself that served him. I'd been shrinking for so long I hadn't realized I'd already outgrown him. But before I could open my mouth, a new voice entered the room, quiet, authoritative, sharp enough to slice the air in half. "Before she begins," the silver-haired man said, "there's something she deserves to know." Something we discovered this morning. People shifted. Dr. Kaplan's expression hardened. My stomach tightened. Evan froze. The man continued slowly, each word landing like a weight. Someone attempted to interfere with your authorship and reassign credit for your work before tonight's meeting. The room went dead silent. My pulse hammered. And beside me, I felt Evan's whole body go rigid. The words hung in the air heavy enough to bend it. Someone attempted to interfere with your authorship. I didn't breathe. The room didn't breathe. But Evan, he stopped existing. His presence shrank so sharply I could feel the space around him tremble. The silver-haired man wasn't looking at him. No one was. They were all looking at me, waiting for the kind of reaction they assumed someone in my position would have: confusion, concern, maybe shock. But what rose up inside me was colder. Sharper, something that had been building for months. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice steady enough that several people visibly relaxed, like they'd been bracing for fragility I didn't have anymore. He nodded to one of the analysts in the room. A woman with short hair and thick glasses tapped a monitor. An email popped up on the screen, partially redacted, but not enough to hide the sender. Evan's full name was right there at the top, time-stamped early that morning. In the message, written in the careful, faux professional tone he used when he was lying, he claimed he was the strategic liaison for the project and that I had assisted him in developing the architecture. He suggested the consortium credit him on all public-facing materials. He asked them to correct the oversight in the meeting agenda, and he signed it with that idiotic stylized signature he practiced in our apartment mirror. A slow murmur rolled through the room. Disbelief, annoyance, the kind of contempt reserved for people who fool themselves into thinking they can con their way into legitimacy. I stared at the screen long enough for the edges of my vision to pulse. Evan finally spoke, voice cracking under the weight of his own panic. I didn't mean it like that. This is a misunderstanding. I was trying to help." "No," the analyst cut in flatly. "You were trying to insert yourself into a project you have no affiliation with. You claimed intellectual leadership over work you didn't know existed until tonight." Evan swallowed hard. His eyes darted to me, pleading, desperate, pathetic. "Babe, I was scared they'd take advantage of you. I was trying to protect." "Stop," I said quietly. He did, immediately, like a conditioned response. The silver-haired man turned back to me. "We didn't inform you earlier," he said, "because we wanted to investigate first. We've already filed a formal report with his employer. Naturally, we weren't sure if you were aware of his attempt." My throat tightened, not from hurt, but from the realization that this wasn't the first time he'd tried to steal something from me. It was just the first time someone had caught him. "I wasn't aware," I said, "but I'm not surprised." There was a subtle shift then, a collective acknowledgement that I already knew who he was, that this wasn't a betrayal that blindsided me. It was one that confirmed everything I'd already survived. Dr. Kaplan stepped closer, her voice low enough for only a few of us to hear. "You tell us what you want to happen next," she said. "He doesn't dictate the room tonight. You do," and just like that, the axis of the night turned. I felt the weight of the offer, not vengeance, not anger, but power. Real, tangible power. The kind that required clarity, not emotion. I could have exposed him in front of everyone. I could have humiliated him the way he'd spent years trying to do to me. I could have told them about the digs, the belittling, the airport, the way he needed me small to feel large. But that would have been too easy, too emotional. Revenge, I realized, shouldn't be a reaction. It should be a decision. "I want to see everything he sent," I said. "Every attempt to involve himself. Every claim he made." The analyst nodded and opened a folder, screenshots, emails, message logs, enough to burn down the image he'd spent years inflating. Evan let out a jittery, helpless, "Please, please don't, just talk to me, okay? Can we go outside, please?" I didn't look at him. I looked at the evidence, at the people waiting for my lead, at the life I'd built that he'd tried, once again, to hijack. And when I finally lifted my head, I knew exactly how I was going to destroy him. I stood there, surrounded by screens filled with his lies, preparing to dismantle the man who'd spent years chiseling me down to fit inside his shadow. The room waited. Evan stood trembling, colorless, staring at the evidence like he could will it into disappearing. I was ready to strike, cold, controlled, decisive. But then the analyst hesitated. Her eyes flicked to another folder on the monitor, one she hadn't opened yet. "There's more," she said quietly. Something in her tone made the silver-haired man step closer. Dr. Kaplan crossed her arms. The host's jaw tightened. They weren't just cautious, they were bracing. The analyst clicked the folder. A new set of documents appeared. And this time, the sender wasn't Evan. It was my company's CEO. My breath stopped mid-chest. I recognized his email instantly. His clipped writing style, his habit of bullet points without hyphens. The timestamps stretched back months. The analyst cleared her throat. "We found these after cross-referencing activity logs with your boyfriend's attempt. We initially thought they were related, but they aren't." The silver-haired man nodded. "Show her." The analyst opened one email. My CEO was writing to another firm, a rival research group in California, one that had previously tried to poach Dr. Kaplan years before. In the email, he claimed my work, my architecture, my models, my testing protocols, belonged to the company, not to our research partnership. He said they were open to possible acquisition of talent and intellectual property. He name-dropped me repeatedly. Aggressively, strategically, another email, and another. And then one that made the room tilt under my feet, a contractual draft proposal. My name on it, my work, my framework. The CEO was offering to package me and everything I'd built for a private sale. Evan gasped, but this time it wasn't guilt. It was realization. He hadn't been the only one trying to steal my work. He'd been the small thief, the distraction. There was a larger betrayal behind him, bigger than anything he was capable of even imagining. I felt the floor drop out beneath me. The edges of the room blurred. I'd been so focused on him, his pettiness, his insecurity, that I hadn't even considered the possibility that something far more dangerous was happening above my line of sight. Why would he do that? I managed. The silver-haired man answered, tone level but edged with disgust. "Because your framework is worth millions in future valuation, potentially billions if adopted nationally. And because he underestimated you, just like your boyfriend did. He assumed you were isolated, that you didn't have allies, that you were just a mid-level analyst who wouldn't know how to fight back." Dr. Kaplan stepped closer, voice low and steady. "We suspected something was off when they delayed approving your internal project protections, but we didn't have proof until now." I pressed a hand to my mouth. It wasn't shock that hit me, it was a cold, widening clarity. Every late-night compliment from the CEO, every time he'd asked me to walk him through the logic again, every moment he'd framed his interest as mentorship. He hadn't been elevating me, he'd been evaluating me. Like property, like a product. And suddenly, Evan's pathetic little email attempt wasn't the betrayal defining the night. It was the doorway to seeing the real one. Evan whispered, "Oh my God, you were never safe." For once, he was right. The analyst turned to me. "There's something else. The CEO didn't just plan to sell your work. He scheduled a meeting with the buyers for Monday morning. 2 days from now. He was going to finalize everything before I even knew it existed." My scalp tingled. A sharp, buzzing heat crawled up my spine. The man I worked for, the one who praised my initiative, who told me I was going places, had been preparing to erase me from my own creation. And no one in that room thought this was something we could recover from quietly. "This changes our strategy," Dr. Kaplan said. "Your revenge isn't about him anymore." She nodded toward Evan without looking at him. "It's about the person who planned to take your life's work out from under you." I felt something harden inside me, colder than anger, clearer than fear, purpose. "I want him exposed," I said. "Completely." Dr. Kaplan nodded. "Then we do this surgically." But the silver-haired man wasn't done. "Before we proceed," he said, "you should know the worst part." He looked at me with a heaviness that made my stomach turn. He wasn't working alone. The room didn't move. No one spoke. Even the soft hum of the monitors felt too loud. He wasn't working alone. The words clung to the air like a cold mist, thick enough to taste. My mouth went dry. "Who helped him?" The silver-haired man didn't answer immediately. He studied me first, my posture, my breath, the stiffness in my shoulders, like he needed to confirm I wouldn't shatter. Then he nodded to the analyst. She opened another window. A Slack export. Internal messages from my own company. A private channel named something bland and corporate, something meant to hide in plain sight. Inside, 3 names I recognized instantly. The CEO, the CTO, and my direct manager. I stared at the screen, reading line after line as if I were sinking underwater, soundless, heavy, dull. They weren't just talking about my work. They were strategizing around me. My manager wrote, "She's brilliant, but she doesn't realize her output can be redirected with the right framing." The CTO replied, "She'll sign whatever IP agreement we put in front of her. She's the type who's grateful just to be included." Then the CEO, "Use her. Accelerate the drafts. Once the external group makes their offer, we reassign the credit and move her to a subsidiary role. She won't have the resources or the confidence to push back." I felt my stomach twist. This wasn't incompetence. This wasn't corporate politics. This wasn't even exploitation. This was design, built around their assumptions about who I was: quiet, diligent, self-doubting. Easy to isolate, easy to undermine, easy to sell. I heard Evan inhale sharply behind me. Jesus, they've been planning this for months. And I realized something horrific. Every moment I thought I was growing, becoming more capable, more accomplished, they weren't blind to it. They were watching. They were mapping out how to take what I built the second it became valuable enough. The silver-haired man stepped closer. "They targeted you because you were effective and underestimated. That combination is dangerous in the wrong hands." My voice came out low. "But why sell the entire framework? Why risk everything for that?" He looked at me then, not with pity, but with a kind of grim understanding. "Because your CEO isn't just trying to profit from your work," he said. "He's trying to bury someone else's." I frowned. "What?" Dr. Kaplan stepped in, face tight. "The rival firm, the one making the offer, they've been developing a transparency model of their own. One built on shortcuts we've been trying to eliminate for years. If your framework is sold to them, they won't use it." She paused. "They'll suppress it." The silver-haired man nodded. "Your CEO stands to gain a board seat with them if he delivers something that neutralizes our initiative. They want your work gone. He wants to be the one who hands it to them." The air around me thinned. This wasn't personal weakness. This wasn't jealousy. This wasn't a boss trying to steal credit. This was a man wagering national policy and my entire future to secure his own assent. He was willing to erase me because erasing me benefited him more than promoting me ever could. I felt something inside me lock into place, like a door sealing shut. "And my manager?" I asked. The analyst clicked another message. "She trusts me, she depends on validation. Keep her overloaded, keep her unsure. The more she questions herself, the easier this becomes." A wave of heat rose through me, not rage, not heartbreak, something darker. I turned to the silver-haired man. "What exactly are you telling me?" His voice dropped to a lower, colder register. "That the people who should have protected your work, your manager, your CTO, your CEO, weren't just complicit. They built a system designed to consume you." The final message on the Slack thread illuminated, almost pulsing. "She won't see it coming." I straightened slowly. "Oh," I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been. "They're wrong." Dr. Kaplan stepped closer, her expression unflinching. "So the question is, what are you prepared to do now that you finally know the truth?" I looked at the screen, at their words, at the arrogance threaded through every line, at the certainty that I would stay small, obedient, grateful. My answer came without hesitation. "Everything." Once I said everything, the room shifted. Not dramatically, no gasps, no whispers, just an acute stillness, the kind that forms when people recognize a decision has crystallized and nothing will pull it back apart. Dr. Kaplan nodded once, sharp, decisive. The silver-haired man exhaled like he'd been waiting for that exact word. "Then we move fast," he said, "and we do it cleanly." I didn't feel adrenaline. I didn't feel fear. What I felt was precision, cold, exact, like stepping onto a narrow beam and realizing I no longer needed the railing. The analysts began pulling up documents: internal logs, metadata, timestamps, the Slack exports. Every message my CEO wrote, every side conversation my manager had, every draft proposal my CTO altered to soften my authorship. Proof layered on proof until the entire wall of monitors looked like an indictment. Then the silver-haired man slid a folder across the table toward me. "This," he said, "is the whistleblower protocol, anonymous, federally protected. Once you submit this, their ability to hide disappears." I opened it. Inside were forms, guidelines, legal pathways I had never imagined myself touching. The weight of it didn't scare me. It steadied me. Evan hovered at the edge of the room, small and shaking. For the first time, he wasn't trying to make it about him. He was watching me, really watching me, like he finally understood the scale of the world I'd been building while he was busy cutting me down. I signed the first form. Then the second. Then the third. The analysts uploaded everything to a secured repository. The silver-haired man placed a call, brief and quiet, informing a federal oversight office that a transparency framework whistleblower file was incoming. When he hung up, he looked at me the way people look at firefighters emerging from burning buildings. Recognition, respect, something heavier beneath both. "Your company," he said, "will be under investigation by morning." I nodded. Good, but retaliation alone didn't feel complete yet. My work needed protection, permanent, undeniable, beyond the reach of anyone who might try to twist it again. Dr. Kaplan stepped beside me. "You're ready for lead authorship on the national proposal. Say the word, and we attach your name to every piece of it publicly before midnight." I felt something tighten at the base of my throat, not emotion, but release. "Yes," I said. "Do it." She didn't smile, but her eyes warmed. "Then you'll walk out of this house with more power than they ever imagined you'd have." The room dispersed into motion, emails drafted, announcements prepared, documentation locked down. My framework, my work, would be tied to me in a way no CEO or CTO could undo without destroying themselves. And only then, when everything was secured and submitted, did I finally turn toward Evan. He flinched like I'd raised a hand. I didn't yell, I didn't gloat, I didn't even approach him. "I knew you didn't respect me," I said quietly, "but I didn't know you thought so little of me that you believed I'd need you to speak for me." His eyes filled fast. Shame maybe, fear definitely. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the problem." He reached for my arm, I stepped back. "We're done," I said. "Tonight isn't about you." It never was. And just like that, whatever hold he once had evaporated. He wasn't a villain anymore. He wasn't even a threat. He was a small man who mistook proximity for ownership. Within the hour, my CEO received the first inquiry from federal auditors. My manager's Slack permissions were frozen. The CTO's access to the research repository was revoked. By morning, the entire executive team would be under review, and the acquisition attempt would collapse in broad daylight. I walked out of that mansion onto a warm Austin night, the lake shimmering below. I breathed for what felt like the first time all year. Not triumph clarity. In 2 days, I would address the consortium as lead architect. In a week, the framework would be public. In a month, my company would no longer exist in the same form. And as I stood on the driveway waiting for my rideshare, the host stepped beside me. "You know," he said, "most people never realize their own power until someone tries to steal it." I looked out over the water. "They shouldn't have tried," I said. He nodded slowly. "No, they shouldn't have." The car pulled up. I opened the door. And as I slid inside, I felt the final, quiet truth settle in my bones. They were right about one thing. I didn't see it coming. But now that I had, they'd never see me coming again.